Established in 1930, the Hays Code remains to this day among the most infamous and over-discussed examples of early movie censorship. The code has its origins in the 1920s, being created as a response to the ever-growing epidemic in the industry relating to scandals and the rise of risque and violent films. Under pressure by religious conservative groups, Will H. Hays, a politician and president of the Motion Picture Producers and Association of America, decided there needed to be rules. As president of the MPPA, or the MPA as we know it now, Hays had claimed that he derided the very concept of censorship, but he attempted to enforce some level of it, though initially it was very unsuccessful. In 1924, Hays introduced the formula, a very unenforced and unenthusiastically received guideline where filmmakers would send in the bare-bone plot synopsis of their films to be examined by the MPPA. It failed. In 1927, he introduced the don'ts and be carefuls, referring to scrupulous themes that movies by state level should be wary of accepting. It did not exactly catch on either, at least at first. Even though none of Hayes' ideas flew back then, mostly because studios had zero obligation to follow them, much of this would become a starting point from which the code would deride a lot of its rules from. So, how did the code come roaring back again in the first place? The good old answer: fear of government regulations. Even if it didn't happen in 1930, there was going to be an attempt at censoring the film industry in some way. The 1950 ruling by the Supreme Court, known as Mutual Film Corporation versus the Industrial Commission of Ohio, had made it clear that movies were not protected by free speech. So to get ahead of the government butting its way through, Hollywood just decided to form a production code themselves. The code was initially drafted by Father Daniel A. Lord, with the aid of several Catholics, including publisher Martin J. Quigley and Father Wilfred Parsons. Eventually, Joseph L. Breen, an Irish American, would also become involved, being known as the one who would be responsible for enforcing the code's iron grip 100%. Now, it's easy to argue, and people have, that the Hays Code did a lot of theoretical good, that it forced filmmakers to hold back, to find new avenues, than merely resorting to a lot of violence and splashier images. Sure, directors like Alfred Hitchcock and Billy Wilder benefited tremendously from heavy restrictions, and there were great movies in the 1940s and 1950s. But the reason I don't really agree with the logic of the code in general is because it was based on transgressive logic. See, as I've alluded to earlier with its origins, the Hays Code was essentially a way for religious people, largely conservative Evangelion Puritans and Catholics, to put their foot down on films, to make their themes and ideals the driving force of American cinema. Essentially, in a way, it was brainwashing. The Legion of Decency, established in 1934, for example, would hold pledges condemning movies that were considered scandalous or far too risque in order to drive down box office numbers in Catholic areas, forcing studios and Will Hays to take the code far more seriously. Because of this and many other reasons, the code pushed back on many progressive ideas that the US film industry seemed to be building more and more towards, like more overt LGBT characters, great roles for women, particularly in dramatic films, that didn't always end with them coming back to a man, any semblance of interracial romances, and so on. That's not even getting into other absurd ideas, like moral endings, happy, sad, or otherwise, not being blatant about religious references because, oh my god, somebody make reference to a higher power. And for my money, the worst aspect of the code, an unquestionable love and admiration of cops. However, when the Hays Code initially started, it was not enforced with 100% clarity. As an actual leader, Will Hays had what you might call a laissez-faire approach. He left movies up to the subject of state-by-state rejection or acceptance. If something was not accepted by New York, it could still play in California or vice versa. There was more of a freedom of what you could or couldn't do, leading to more indecent material or direct violence being shown on screen. To be sure, these movies aren't gushing with blood or sex when compared to a lot of modern movies, but for the time period, they were incredibly shocking. They dared go places that films would not go to until many decades later. Watching these movies today, you can criticize them for the rougher, outdated, problematic elements. Blackface and yellowface are abundant in these type of films, for example, and there's still plenty of African American maids or butlers. but they're interesting from a historical perspective because they reveal a what if. What if Hollywood hadn't been forced, essentially by gunpoint, to become more sanitized, to not be afraid to go to darker places? So I thought it might be interesting to talk about a bunch of different pre-code films, how they represent early 1930s cinema in terms of what filmmakers could actually get away with. This is Exploring Pre-Code Cinema. See you on the other side, guys. But first, if you like videos of this nature, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, check out my website, dansden.net. Anyway, this is a buzzing up that's having a taste of the forbidden fruit. I can't highly recommend I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang enough. Mervyn LeRoy's 1932 film is still one of the most damning portrayals of the American prison system that I can think of. A movie that takes a quick one-eyed glance at how men, some of them wrongfully accused, were poorly treated by an inhumane system. Even in 2023, its themes of social justice and struggling labor via the Great Depression remain incredibly relevant. Paul Muni stars as James Allen, a sergeant who has returned from combat in World War I. Struggling to find a job, he finds himself being forced at gunpoint and then participating in a robbery, where he's caught and sentenced to hard labor at a prison. He eventually manages to escape, but is sold out and discovered, finding himself again to be a fugitive of the law. In 1931, Robert Elliott Burns, a World War I veteran, wrote his novel I Am a Fugitive from a Georgia Chain Gang in the page of True Detective Mysteries magazine. The story was autobiographical, based on Burns' own experience of being convicted of a $5 grocery store theft. The story became instantly popular, and it was immediately optioned for a film by Warner Brothers. Given the novel's serious subject matter and high level of violence, it might not come as a surprise that there was some slight hesitation at first to bring it to the screen. The Warner Brothers story department team attempted to veto its creation on grounds that it was going to go under the tyranny of the current censorship boards, while original director Roy Del Ruth left the project because he thought the original story was too depressing. Concerns about lawsuits from the actual prison camps presented in the film would be glaringly obvious. To get around this, they dropped Georgia from the title, and to make the film more ambiguous, Burns would be changed to James Allen. Nonetheless, the adaptation would be incredibly faithful to the novel, and the main power of its theme would remain the same. The idea of the ordinary man, helpless and alone, versus a system that is seemingly designed to work against him at all costs. These men shackled together are put through brutal conditions, involving hard-grueling labor and inhumane floggings. Though more implied in the later's case, via the faces of the prisoners, the cruelness remains the same, as they're nearly dry dead and helpless. They are not even allowed to wipe the sweat off their faces, unless they get permission from the guards first. And the food they eat every day is the same pig fat, sorghum, and fried dough that is considered so disgusting they can barely swallow it, preferring to starve themselves instead. The prison scenes are aided by an extended dose of authenticity, brought upon by the decision to shoot them in a replica in the Warner Brothers ranch. For the rock-breaking scene, they actually shot in a real vivid rock quarry in Chatsworth. This gives the movie's already hefty subject matter an extra boost of realism and terror. Paul Muni in a performance that gained him plenty of recognition, plus an Oscar nomination, is incredible as a man who goes through various stages of struggle, grief, and then desperation, as his life is forever irreparably damaged by a robbery arrest that he is ultimately only by gun force the unfortunate bystander of.
So they can have their revenge. To keep me here 9 more years. Why, their crimes are worse than mine. Worse than anybody's here.
Muni later became known for being one of the original acting kings of delving deep into a role, getting into a character both psychologically and in terms of heavy makeup. Here, just like in Scarface, the transformation is less face-oriented and fits more in the category of physical shape and appearance. Muni's own commitment to the part of James Allen would go as far as him attempting to take inspiration from the lives of actual guards and prison wardens still working in Georgia. Warner Brothers was quick to shoot that idea down, wisely so, since that sounds like it would be a potentially logistical and financial nightmare. He did, however, interview Robert E. Burns and met with several California guards in preparation for his part. Jim lives a forced lifestyle. He struggles to make ends meet, and when he finds himself in a bad situation, he isn't presented as some sort of mistaken glorified soul. Instead, he resorts to desperate measures to ensure his freedom. When he gets out of prison, the first thing he does is to hide out in his friend's boarding room, where he has a very specific relationship with a woman named Helen, and then is blackmailed into marrying another one named Mary. The romance between Jim and Helen is not presented as all lovey-dovey. Instead, a lot of dialogue between the two, especially for the time, is quite openly frank and honest. Though it's not shown in full, Helen is a prostitute, and for the time she's portrayed in a positive, delicate manner by actress Helen Vinson. While his relationship with Mary, as played by Glenda Farrell, is almost shown to be the complete inverse of that. Mary is somebody that Jim grows to loathe. She has numerous infidelities, and eventually, she's willing to sell out Jim for her own personal gain. Oh, and I just like to highlight this long shot of Helen's back. I can kind of appreciate where they're going with this one. This is part of Chain Gang's pre-code potent nature. It presents characters as real flawed human beings who have contrasting lives, make questionable decisions, and are not merely put in a box of sorely good versus evil. This all culminates in the film's thrilling conclusion, where Alan, having learned that despite his good behavior, the parole board still wants him to stay in the chain gang, snaps for good and goes on the run once again, leading to a very thrilling chase sequence where a worried and tired Alan confronts his girlfriend Helen one last time as he mutters these immortal lines.
How do you live?
I steal.
Movie legend has it that this closing scene happened almost entirely by accident. While filming in Los Angeles, several lights fused out at the same time, causing the cast and crew to be plunged into darkness. Director Mervyn LeRoy liked this effect enough that it was decided that Muni should deliver his last lines from a completely black screen. I don't know what's better about this conclusion, Muni's frightened face, or the fact the ending goes against everything that the code would later stand for. It's not a happy ending, but it's not punishing our main character either. It's just angry. Angry because this man was brought down a level of a common thief by the whims of an unfair structure. And now there's no place for him to go. He's alone, all by himself. There are multiple ways you can read this film, but its power cannot be denied. I am a fugitive from a chain gang's message of prison bigotry and violence, resonating incredibly well with the public. How much it actually led to genuine prison reform, however, is debatable. What is true, though, is that it did make more Americans start to question their legal system, and subsequently the release of the novel's author, Robert E. Burns. It even got the attention of the actual wardens of the Georgia chain gang, both past and present, J. Harold Hardy and Paul Phillips, to sue Warner Brothers for presenting them in a slanderous light. Swell, guys, swell. In a post-Hays Code implemented world, social movies still existed, but these were films that were more meant to teach Americans to appreciate other groups, or they were basically propaganda training tools. Actual films that were critical of the government system were all but excised, as the code intentionally sought to squash any feature that might even have a single issue with any part of the American lifestyle or the government system. Something like Chain Gang can only be made at the time it was. Like anything, Robert E. Burns' actual account is subject to interpretation and debate. This shouldn't take away from I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang's strength. This film about the horrible living conditions of the prison system was made in 1932, and yet it's a good reminder. The more things change, the more they stay the same. 2 words. Mae West. Just Mae West. Really, it's hard to overstate just how much of a force of nature Mae West was, both in her time and in a modern context. A trailblazer both in terms of sexual content and overt flirtiness. In a way, if it wasn't for Mae West, the Hays Code would have never been enforced the way it was. Her movies, especially for the time, challenged all sorts of preconceived notions of what you could and couldn't say on screen. But before Mae West was ever really a film star or exactly a major name, She was, like a lot of performers of her day, a stage presence. In 1927, she got arrested because she wrote a dirty, obscene play for the time, aptly named Sex. This is not an urban myth either. Somehow Americans were so uptight then that just one pinch of sexual urge was enough to send you to the doghouse. Mae West's time in Hollywood, though, was actually a lot shorter than you might think. During her mainstream career, Mae West only appeared in about 10 movies, largely owing to the censorship of the time. Her work on the screen paled in comparison to what she accomplished on the stage. After appearing in a supporting role as a sort of test run in 1932's Night After Night, Mae West would sign a contract with Paramount. Immediately following that, the studio would get to creating star vehicles for her, beginning with 1933's mega hit, She Done 'Em Wrong, directed by Lowell Sherman, a screen adaptation of West's own 1928 Broadway play, Diamond Lily, the name having been changed, because back then diamonds were associated with more spicy material. Oh my, She Done 'Em Wrong stars Mae West as Lady Lou, a body singer who works in the Bowery bathroom of her boss and benefactor Gus. As it turns out though, Gus is running a counterfeit money operation, leading Lady Lou into getting all sorts of trouble. The movie ends when Cary Grant's Captain Cummings, with whom Lou has been vaguely romantically involved with, is revealed to be an undercover agent, arrests Gus, and Mae West ends up with the worst punishment of them all, becoming engaged to Cary Grant. It would be easy to say that because West had no direct on-screen credit in adapting her own play, that would mean that She Done 'Em Wrong would be a watered-down version of her stage act. But oh no, in actuality, that couldn't be further from the truth.
And you, Mr.
She Done 'Em Wrong is an incredibly evocative film, with Mae West performing musical numbers and glamorous poses in 1930s incredible dresses that are meant to make men look grubby and people squirm. The movie touches on ideas of prostitutes, implied white slavery, as well as some open cleavage. This is the Mae West film that ran the least amount of issues with the censorship boards, and in that way, it remains pretty miraculous. There's a scene in this movie where Mae West stabs and kills a woman. Nobody questions her for it, she doesn't get punished, it's never even revealed that she did it, nor does it ever really get referenced again. Yeah, this is a pre-code film where ethnic morals are last things on people's minds. As an actual movie though, She Done 'Em Wrong I can't say particularly worked for me personally. Running about typical for the time, brisky 66 minutes. It doesn't have enough in the way of actual coherent material to support its particular film structure. The romance between Mae West, Lady Lou, and Cary Grant's Captain Cummings, probably intentionally so, feels incredibly shallow, and is never expanded upon. While the plot involving counterfeiting money feels so arbitrary, it just seems like something that was added onto the film because they remembered the movie needed to have some kind of conflict. Much of this rough type of material would be done much better with Mae West's other 1933 film, I'm No Angel, a film that has many of the same conceptual problems of She Done 'Em Wrong, but packages it into something more resembling that of an engrossing narrative. Where She Done 'Em Wrong does work though is as an actual star vehicle for Mae West. The first 10 minutes alone involve a bunch of dirty-eyed men talking about how beautiful West's Lady Lou is before she arrives on the scene. When you see her with that voice of hers and the way she carries herself, it's not hard to see why. West was the best kind of star, the performer with an incredible personality. She had a very specific character and she knew how to use that character to her advantage. Even though she made very few movies, she made almost all of them work to some degree through her specific wit and charm. She Done 'Em Wrong is a full-throttle showcase for West, playing off her stage persona, allowing her to sing, showcasing her double entendres.
No, I always did like a man in a uniform, and that one fits you grand. Why don't you come up sometime, see me?
She is a forerunner to many sexy female characters to come, and yet in a way she was always in on the joke. She acts upon men rather than having them act upon her. She was not considered conventionally attractive in her day, and yet she has a confidence and posture that is unmistakable. Jewelry is the name of the game for Lou, and yet she's in charge and control. Everyone is transfixed by her appearance. Everything in this film, from the costumes to the setting to the plot, is played big. I would be remiss not to mention that this film features a stereotypical black main character of the time. However, Mae West was the one who personally asked for the actress, Louise Beavers, to be in the film. West was incredibly controversial in her day because she dared work alongside people of color on stage, when many others in her same profession wouldn't dare. West also took a lot of influence from black performers. Her signature shimmy dance, for example, was heavily inspired by black jazz clubs of the time. This might be considered cultural appropriation and theft, but unlike a lot of other people who stole art wholesale from underrepresented and underappreciated groups, West would be quick to credit where her influences came from. This doesn't make it good, nor does it make Mae West look super progressive or anything, but it is important to consider in the context of when her films were made. At least Lou and her maid had some genuinely good repertoire together, even if any time she was on screen. I did want to shake my head a little, because the character acts in a very stereotypical fashion. Wrong would prove to be a huge hit, earning over $2 million in about 3 months. A hefty sum back then, and it was stated by some theaters to have the biggest repeat business for a movie since The Birth of a Nation. West wound up overtaking Greta Garbo and Marlene Dietrich for a hot minute as cinema's favorite female provocateur. However, while the film drew massive crowds, and West had thousands of fan letters rolling in, it had consequences. A year after Wrong's release, the production code, now under leadership of Joseph Breen, would start to crack down its iron hands on 100% censorship. While it's hard to say what exactly was the driving catalyst for this decision, all film historians agree on one thing: that Mae West was not a positive towards the code's inevitable full control. West did try to sincerely make movies in a post-Hays Code world, but constantly ran afoul of censorship laws that tried to change up even the slightest bit of saucier material. At one point, she tried to alter her image by playing a missionary in Klondike Annie. This movie starts out as a regular Mae West more neutered comedy, before evolving into what one might describe as something resembling that of a good Christian story. Nobody bought it though, because come on, you go to see Mae West for her dirty blonde routine, not to see her try to play some equivalent of Mother Nature. West's act, heavily watered down or otherwise, just had no place in a more conservative American movie landscape. So instead of trying to fight censorship or continuing to make movies that she thought were beneath her, West would turn to the one place that would still take her: the stage, more specifically Vegas. Later on in her older age, she also became a legacy performer and an influence on a lot of performers to come, particularly drag entertainers. We all think of Mae West these days as being a pusher of buttons, of heavily implied if not outright shown sexual content and dialogue. And while that's true, it can't be understated how much of a groundbreaker she was. Not just in terms of her language, but also in terms of being an independent female comedian who got things done her own way. She did them wrong, I can't say I found all that particularly successful at what it set out to do, but it's hard to deny West's charisma and energy as a performer. She was truly one of a kind. Before The Godfather, before Goodfellas, before No Country for Old Men, before The Irishman, there was Little Caesar. We don't appreciate it these days because it's become commonplace in these type of stories, but so much of what we associate with modern mob movies have their start here. Powerful rises and tragic falls, check. The morality of crime, check. Anti-heroes as our protagonists, check. The use of Tommy guns, check. Mervyn LeRoy's Second Time's a Charm, influential 1931 crime film, took on subject matter which for the time was considered dark and disturbing, with sheer force and energy. Oh, and also, just before anyone asks, no, this movie has nothing to do with pizza, though thinking about that title too much might make one a bit hungry. In a career-defining role that would permanently cast him as the de facto crime guy, Edward G. Robinson gives a tour-de-force terrific performance as Cesar Enrico Rico Bandillo, a man who climbs the Chicago mob underworld. Rico's journey of acquiring power is detailed step by step, his overtaking and killing of his old boss to his eventual betrayal and inevitable death. Rico is presented as a morally complex character. On the one hand, his actions are repugnant and unforgivable in nature. At the same time, the movie plays him off like a sort of doom-flawed hero, somebody the Depression-era audiences of 1931 could potentially find inspiring. He is not glamorous, he has zero interest in females, he doesn't drink, and his best friend is a man named Joe, played by Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Rico's specific relationship with Joe, and for that matter his assistant Otero, can best be described as being lovingly intimate in a way that would not be allowed after 1934. However, it is also that relationship with Joe that eventually gets the better of him by the end and leads to his demise. Robinson plays Rico with a sort of implied false dignity, that underneath that psychotic behavior and gun-toting exterior, he's actually a wimp who wants to play with the big boys.
How's Diamond Pete going to stop me? He may be your boss, but he ain't mine.
For example, he doesn't smoke cigars until the man near the top of the crime organization offers him one, by which point it becomes a game of him pathetically trying to copy his boss. Rico may come off as tough and intimidating, but in actuality his personality is meek and small. He's a little punk trying to act strong. Before Little Caesar, Edward G. Robinson was a theater actor who had just started to break into movies, although he'd played mobsters before, most notably on stage in a play called The Racket. With Little Caesar, Robinson's career forever be changed, now being associated with crooks and scrupulous characters in crime noirs. Even though the types of roles he played over the years were more far wide-ranging than one might think, his voice through cartoons and impressions is the one we most commonly associate with prototypical gangsters.
If you ain't out of town by tomorrow morning, you won't never leave it except in a pine box.
What a pal, what a pal, what a pal, what a pal!
Rusty, you remember the time we got loaded and set those beavers loose in that pine furniture store? Memories.
It might seem odd with more modern eyes that Little Caesar was even considered a violent picture in the first place, given that most of the actual killings are implied rather than shown. However, particularly for the time period, Little Caesar, both the film and the novel it's based off, was considered shocking and atypical in part because it portrayed gangsters as tough and uncompromising. When W.R. Burnett wrote Little Caesar in 1929, which was inspired by his experiences as a night clerk in the North Mirror Motel, it was the perfect time to do so. The Speakeasy era in the 18th Amendment had given rise to bootlegging organized crime, figures like Al Capone, and a slew of controversial stories involving corrupt politicians and law enforcement kept popping up in the news frequently. The same year that Little Caesar was published, the stock market crash occurred. This brought with it the Great Depression. As I mentioned before in this video, and as I will mention again, the Great Depression's impact on what type of movies became popular cannot be overstated. Gangster movies with their grim fates and psychotic protagonists might not seem like ideal 1930s entertainment, yet they brought with them a, for the time, refreshing on-screen bleakness. They gave American audiences a sort of reality power fantasy. They could still be successful and rich, but only if they didn't go down the path of the dark side. Little Caesar was not the first gangster movie by any means, but it was perhaps the first one to successfully convey the dangers of organized crime. So while the violence remains largely only implied, the movie's main message is shown loud and clear. It is through dark cities and dangerous rooms that we are presented a version of the big American city that is shown to be beyond approach, beyond corruptible, that going in one violent direction never leads to anything good, and that ultimately having too much power comes at the cost of everything else. This crime doesn't pay approach sounds very generic Hays Code in nature, and certainly the movie isn't afraid to punish its main protagonist for participating in this horrible lifestyle to begin with. But these are much different gangsters than the more sanitized, straightforward bad cop killers we would later get. They and so many other pre-1934 films fit more in the category of what you might call glamorized. To them, killing and stealing from others is fun. There are scenes of them hanging out and just having a good time. However, while they are presented as friends, they are more than willing to sell each other out as they fall to the thralls of power. This itself gets to the movie's biggest problem, which is the same issue with most gangster movies. Is it really pessimistic towards crime, or is it presenting in such a way that it looks far too fun and exciting? Certainly there are ways to interpret the movie, as showing Rico's actions in an incredibly resourceful and fun light, that it could give one the impression that the mob is truly that much of a breeze in real life. The film, however, was clearly made first and foremost with an anti-gangster lens in mind. Thus, while the film does present being a gangster as a form of entertainment, it is also willing to show the negative repercussions that happen when someone decides to turn to a life of crime to begin with. Little Caesar proved to be the right movie released at the right time. Its unique dark crime approach turned out to be something that audiences during hard economic times hungered for. The movie would be a huge hit, setting the stage for a number of other similar gangster-related movies that would come in the years to follow. Just compare the funeral scene from Little Caesar to the Don Fanucci murder sequence from The Godfather Part 2. Watching Little Caesar today, what stuck with me the most was how resourceful it is using its short runtime. We meet our main character, he joins the mob, and we're off to the races. It suffers from the same problem that most early talkies do, i.e. a lack of a consistent score or more slow moments. But even if you think it's antiquated or outdated, having been outdone by gangster movies since then, it's hard not to respect it for what it eventually spawned. Sometimes, you just gotta give it up for the classics. Busby Berkeley productions are what I would describe as musical plotless showcases. They're full of memorable numbers, featuring incredible energy and performances, but as actual narratives, they tend to lack in terms of overall moment-by-moment structure, feeling more like excuses for big extravagance rather than anything resembling story cohesion. As a result, it is often hard to recommend them to modern eyes that are more accustomed to films that are driven more by character interaction and progression. An exception to this rule is 1933's Gold Diggers of 1933, which doubles as both an excuse for incredible show-stopping performances, while also having a solid structure of a plot that fits it squarely in the middle of the Great Depression. It is an incredibly satisfying and rewarding experience in its own right, with funny dialogue and some wonderful poignant social commentary for the time. The Gold Diggers musical franchise bore itself out of every Hopper's play, The Gold Diggers, generally credited for popularizing the term, referring to females seeking to gain wealth by marrying men way out of their social circles. The first Gold Diggers adaptation was more of a straightforward comedy based on Hopper's play, being about a man who marries a woman who is accused by friends and family of wanting him sorely for his fortune, not because she's actually in love with him. Sadly, the entire film doesn't exist, and what we have of it isn't in the best condition. But what it does tell us is that it was a traditional comedy of manners, just with a social class dynamic at play. When Warner Brothers decided to readapt the material again in 1929's Gold Diggers at Broadway, they went the typical route that any early talkie would. They made it into a musical. Though again, unfortunately, only the last 15 minutes of the final film exists, given what we know, most of it based on the remaining footage and reviews of the time. The genesis of what would eventually become the formula for the Gold Diggers franchise going forward has its start here. A bunch of Broadway stage performers put on a show which is an excuse for some incredibly well choreographed numbers, while romantic complications happen backstage. This film, however, is much different from later day Gold Diggers movies, because it's enhanced by the use of very early, rather primitive Technicolor. It also seems to lack, just based on this footage alone, the more pleasurable extravagance of Busby Berkeley's style. In the years since the release of Broadway, Busby Berkeley made musicals had become popular and lucrative for Warner Brothers, and following the huge success of 32nd Street, it felt only natural that they should go back to the Gold Diggers well again, tentatively titled High Life, before having its name changed. Gold Diggers of 1933 is thematically the same approach as Gold Diggers of Broadway. But what Berkeley and director Mervyn LeRoy, him again, did with 1933 is they managed to up the game, both in terms of big splashy numbers and thematic material built around the film's music. The movie stars three ladies, Joan Blondell's Carol, Elaine McMahon's Trixie, and Ruby Killer's Polly. They all share an apartment and are trying to make ends meet, having to resort to stealing milk, when Ned Roberts' Broadway producer Barney Hopkins comes to them in desperation. He's struggling to get the funding for a big splashy musical that he's working on. The girls agree to star, and Broadway composer Dick Powell's Brad Roberts helps put up the money to get the show made. The movie then becomes about as much about putting on a great show as it does playing up the romantic entanglements of its main leads. The three female leads, Joan Blondell, Aline McMahon, and Ruby Keeler, are great together. You find them both believable as a trio of friends living together, and also as one side of the coin of a bickering couple. Joan Blondell's Carol is initially presented as the pessimistic one, constantly making reference to the fact that they can barely afford things.
Hey! Who'd you think it was, the wolf?
If it was, we'd eat it.
She gets romantically involved with Warren Williams, J. Lawrence Bradford. Though the reason why they get together is definitely 1930s romantic comedy plot contrivances. Though I still love it either way. Ruby Keeler's Polly is seemingly the most optimistic of the three. When she gets news that they might be starring in a potentially big production, she's jumping for joy. Unlike the other two, she's already established to be in love and in a relationship with Dick Powell's Brad Roberts, who she looks at with admiration.
Oh, he's wonderful, Trixie. Honey, he's a songwriter. So's Irving Berlin.
While Aline McMahon's Trixie is basically the balance ground between the two. She's constantly pessimistic, but she's not as dooming as Carol is, nor does she think things will get better like Polly does. She fits the moniker of a gold digger, the best out of the three. However, as a result, her love interest might be the most on paper unappealing of the bunch, being a daddy-looking funny lawyer named Faneuil H. Peabody, played by Guy Kilby. Oh, and if you're a fan of fast-talking women in movies, don't worry. She's got you covered.
So you know there's more to that kid than I thought there was. He has nerve. He's regular. He belongs in the show business.
So, for as much of a big and splashy musical as Gold Diggers of 1933 actually is, it is also quite a dark story in many regards, built around economic concerns of finding work during the peak of the Depression era. It reflected an audience that wanted to see their experiences shown on the silver screen in a way that could be done to lift their spirits. The opening musical number, We're in the Money, for example, works both as an optimistic lyrical counterpart to the Depression and also as a less than enthralling song about trying to make it in a hard-bound world. As Ginger Rogers, in an outfit of silver coins, sings about old man depression, it seems incredibly joyful, but there's a secret air of sadness, just sparkling in the background. Originally, Berkeley actually wanted to go one step further with the Depression themes by having the opening number be more semi-documentary in feel. Warner Brothers, of course, was against that idea, so instead it was scrapped in favor of something that was theoretically supposed to be more optimistic sounding. That is until you actually read between the lines and see, oh yeah, this is actually pretty downbeat thematically. It doesn't help either that immediately following this sequence, the tax collector shows up and it's revealed the musical is closing due to lack of funding, putting the performers out of a job in the process. Well, so much for being a joyful number. Looks like reality has struck again. And as for the rest of the musical sequences, well, if you can't relate to the story on a thematic level, they are definitely worth watching. Though it is still primarily a lot of talking and comedy, Gold Diggers of 1933 is basically the equivalent of production excess for Buzzley Berkeley, who uses it as an excuse to stage some of the most elaborate out there numbers for the time period, built around gimmicks, incredible visuals, flamboyant, wonderful dances, and his trademark of having loads and loads of extras. Pettin' in the Park is a wonderful, risque, joyful number where a bunch of men and women act out the title in various suggestive forms. It's a number that includes this kind of bit. And you're probably wondering to yourself why they call it pre-code. Well, here's a good example. The Shadow Waltz is a hypnotic tune built around an incredible sequence involving girls waltzing in the dark to the tenor of violins. The hoop skirt costuming in the sequence involved 2,000 yards of white china silk. Interestingly, during the first day of rehearsing that number, the Los Angeles area was shaken by an earthquake. Nobody was seriously hurt, but the ramp that was used for the sequence had to be repaired before they could get to filming it properly. While Remember My Forgotten Man is the film's grand finale, a, for the time, incredibly period-potent social commentary of a song, making a plea to people to help out the unemployed servicemen who were struggling because of the economic crisis. This sequence, inspired by the 1932 War Veteran March on Washington, D.C., and taking direct elements from German Expressionism, involved 150 extras costumed as soldiers as they move through a huge half-wheel contraption, while Joan Blondell sings of what they're trying to grapple with. The Warner Brothers executives were so impressed with this sequence, they decided it should be the concluding number. Beyond the musical numbers themselves, this is a movie that is brimming with sexual suggestion, from risque time period dialogue to this sequence where Trixie actually tries to steal Ginger Rogers' Faye's clothes, and she gives her a slap when she resists.
We'll give you something good enough for a drugstore.
I know, but the dress belongs to them. I'm a hostess there.
Stand still.
Oof, old movies were actually kind of rough. While it lacks the straightforward grace and charm that some later musicals would have, Berkeley's mentality of throwing everything at the kitchen sink results in giving Gold Diggers of 1933 an incredible energy and sound that is hard to ignore. Gold Digger movies will continue to be a staple in Warner Bros. Arsenal for the next several years following, but while impressive in their own rights, none are as raw, as poignant, as funny, and as relevant as 1933 is. It is truly a definition of a first-rate musical. About as controversial and eye-opening as it could be in its day, Eric C. Ketten's first adaptation of the H.G. Wells classic, The Island of Dr. Moreau, Island of Lost Souls, pushed the censorship to the back-breaking limit of the highest level of don'ts, to the point where it was banned for years, because of how seemingly perverted it got. Richard Arlen stars Edward Parker, a sailor who finds himself shipwrecked on an island inhabited by Dr. Moreau, a scientist played by Charles Laughton. Moreau is actually a madman, experimenting with animals, turning them into human-like creatures in an attempt to find what he calls the missing link between animal and man. When Parker learns the horrifying truth, he tries to escape the island for his dear life, but Moreau will go to any lengths to ensure that Parker will never leave. In 1896, seminal science fiction author H.G. Wells published his novel, The Island of Dr. Moreau, the story concerning a shipwrecked man who lands on the island of a crazed mad scientist who experiments with animals, became an instant classic of the sci-fi genre. Flash forward to 1931. Paramount had just released their adaptation of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with Frederick March. The movie became a huge hit and nabbed March an Academy Award for Best Actor. Paramount's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde took a very intentionally sexual approach to the classic Robert Louis Stevenson story, the Mr. Hyde in this adaptation essentially referring to the idea of a primal beast that is inside every man when he transforms. Paramount, looking for a way to follow that film up, decided to set their sights on another messed up classic of the mad scientist category, The Island of Dr. Moreau. So, did lightning strike twice? Well, kinda, but they definitely got more than they bargained for.
Bartman! Beast! Thing!
Island of Lost Souls is one of those movies that really needs to be seen to be believed. While it's commonly mistaken for a universal horror movie, mainly because they released it on VHS, and it features the presence of Bela Lugosi as the monstrous sword of the law, it goes much more further than any universal horror of the time period ever did, featuring incredible lighting and cinematography by Carl Kruss and a foggy atmosphere to fit. It is one of the most pre-code movies I can possibly think of, covering themes ranging from evolution gone haywire to indebted servitude and slavery. Charles Laughton, having just barely established himself in Hollywood, gives a commanding theatrical performance as Monroe, a gentleman-like seeming man who in actuality is an incredibly towering figure that is just as frightening looking as the monsters he invents.
Mr. Parker, do you know what it means to feel like God?
It is through Laughton's performance that we understand Moreau's insane motivations. How he hides behind a mask, has no regard for anyone, not even his own creations, which he often treats as pawns in his own game of power. The scenes of him experimenting with actual screams in the background are about as unpleasant as anything else from that period. Laughton's own commitment to the role involved him practicing with a bullwhip that he used on stage. For his distinctive beard, he was inspired by a doctor that he'd worked with previously. Some reports even say that he and director Eric C. Ketten butted heads on set at several points, with the later flat out insulting Laughton frequently during the shoot. The creatures that Monroe creates are given an extra boost via incredible groundbreaking makeup by a team of Wally Westmore and Charles Gamore. They're not quite human, not entirely two-legged monster appearances, being a forerunner of future creations like Werewolf of London and the Wolfman. They include characters like Oran, portrayed by German wrestler Hans Stenke, and Monroe's dog-like assistant Maling, played by Chinese actor Tetsu Kamoi. However, the most unique and successful of Moreau's creations is the Panther Woman. The Panther Woman was a character created specifically for this film, and boy did Paramount not want you to forget her. With her scantily clad appearance and her ever not so unsubtle erotic suggestions, she is, to put a fine word, like maybe 50% of the reasons the censorship boards of the day had major issues with this film. The Panther Woman would be portrayed by newcomer Kathleen Burke. Burke won the part after impressing voters during a 5-week massive promotional contest in Hollywood. The character would prove to be vital to the film's marketing campaign, with her face being used for promotional material including the poster, and the actress would simply be credited as the Panther Woman in the opening. The scenes between her and Richard Arlen's Edward Parker are definitely a thing that pushes the movie into a higher level of not so subtly implied bestiality. I can see why Catholics, or more religious people of 1932, might have had some issues with this film. Oh, and just because she's more human looking than the rest, doesn't mean she's still not an animal at heart. Amazingly, for what was considered an extremely grotesque and controversial movie for its time, elements of the original script suggested they somehow could have gone even further. In one scene, in retaliation to being slashed, Dr. Monroe beats the half-naked Panther Woman to near death, while the ending was far more gruesome and tragic, with Monroe sewing Parker's face onto the head of a faceless creature. If audiences of 1932 thought the movie was already perverted and gross as is, just imagine what they would have thought had the film gone down more the road of something like Freaks. The ending as is, though, is still incredibly disturbing, beyond the obvious shown imagery itself. A man having his own creations turn against him once they realize they outnumber him and he doesn't actually have any control over them is rough to consider. It also serves as a worthy conclusion to a person who overplayed his hands as the deity of creation. The terrifying parade of close-ups of long shots on the creatures' faces definitely adds to the uneasiness. Are we not men? They shout repeatedly. Well, as it turns out, they are in fact men. I should also mention this movie left quite the influence on cult new wave rock bands. I mean, just for example.
Are we not men?
Are we not men? We are Devo. Are we not men? Devo.
What is the law?
What is the law? What is the law?
When Paramount attempted to reissue Lost Souls in 1935, they ran afoul of new censorship laws in place, which put down the film for its high level of nightmare fuel. When they tried it again in 1941, it was rejected once more. Shockers. Except this time, it led Joseph Breen to writing this letter. The blasphemous suggestion of the character, played by Charles Laughton, wherein he presumes to create human beings out of animals, the obvious suggestion of the attempt of these animals to mate with human beings, and the excessive gruesomeness and horror. All these tend to make the picture quite definitely repulsive, and not suitable for screen entertainment before mixed audiences. Island of Lost Souls broke so many barriers that made the Joseph Breen-led Hays Code censorship lose their head. It covered unacceptable, gruesome, and sexual themes. But perhaps what was the final straw was that Charles Laughton played what he said he was in the movie, God. Island of Lost Souls is not a perfect movie. There are many things you can criticize this film for that I might be in agreement with. Richard Arlen is serviceable in the lead role, but he can sometimes come off as a bit bland. The female characters, including his fiancée Ruth Thomas, are not the best written either. But these imperfections are part of why I find it so fascinating. Even 80 years later, it stands out from this era of boundary-pushing films. The fact that even H.G. Wells at the time hated it because he thought it went too far, well, that just says it all, really. What movie really did cause the code to go into hyperdrive? That's a question that has a lot of hypotheticals and asterisks around it. Some might say Island of Lost Souls. Others couldn't probably have good reason to point to Mae West movies, while most would probably argue it was a combination of all of those things. If there was one movie, though, that's a clear fulcrum point that solidified the Code's standing to enforce its iron will for good, that would be Babyface. The 1933 Alfred Green directed film stands as one of the most controversial and shocking movies released in its time. Numerous states wouldn't approve the movie because of its saucier themes, and it still remains a fascinating object all these years later. Barbara Stanwyck stars Lily Powers, a woman living a miserable experience at a speakeasy owned by her father Nick during the Prohibition era. When Nick is killed in an explosion, Lily is told by her friend and the only man she trusts, Crag, an old peddler, to take advantage of her looks, to follow the Friedrich Nietzsche philosophy of exerting one's personal power over others to get what they want. Lily and her friend Chico travel to New York, where Lily starts reaching the top of the corporate ladder by seducing men. Sex is the name of the game in Babyface. This is a dark, dark movie that deals with heavy subject matter. And in the first 10 minutes alone, Lily is insulted by her hateful drunk father, a bunch of guys call her derogatory, insulting names, and she's sold out to a politician that tries to assault her. Yeah, this is not exactly what I would call rainbow and sunshine type material, and keep in mind, this is just the first act. Though some of its seedier sexual elements, particularly the sex scenes, are implied rather than shown, the implications are still glaringly obvious. In that classic pre-code sort of way, this is a movie that isn't afraid to portray the real world as dark and gritty, and as immoral and reprehensible. Barbara Stanwyck gives an incredible movie star performance as Lily Powers, a character that, because she's been raised on the wrong side of the tracks, can come off as confusing and questionable. Yet every time she's on screen, because of Stanwyck, you can't help but be fascinated by her presence.
Now, why don't we sit down and talk this thing over?
She will do anything to get what she wants, as she lures men in with her flirtatious behavior and incredible costumes, designed by Orrid Kelly, destroying their lives in the process. These include, of all people, a very young bank manager played by an actor named John Wayne. Hey, what happened to that guy anyway? Powers is assisted by her confidant, a black woman named Chico, as played by Teresa Harris. Chico serves the role of a person she can talk to. Unfortunately, while admirably conceived part, and Teresa Harris does a great job in the role, after a strong opening where you assume she's going to go beyond the usual African-American female stereotype of the time, Chico gets sidelined, ultimately devolving into the typical role of the maid. Babyface is a classic example of an early sleaze piece that can be read in multiple different ways. The movie is ostensibly a stay at the camera and look great picture, but it's also a damning portrayal of a woman's place and the most male-male hierarchies, that of big banking. Yes, the character is in a way a demeaning portrait of a woman, but also, what else can she do? She can make it on her own theoretically, but the system in place is so tilted towards men that she lives out her days as a lonely, forgotten secretary, or she becomes super successful. To her, the decision couldn't be more obvious. I think a lot of credit here should be given to co-screenwriter Catherine Scola, a longtime female Hollywood scripter, who alongside her writing partner Gene Markey, probably gave this film a bit more of a clear feminist edge to it. It also helps that all the men in the film are presented as absolute bozos. Lily plays them like a fiddle because it's glaringly obvious they can't tell a woman's character beyond her superficial appearance. However, even before the film was scheduled for release, it had proven to be quite dicey as a concept, having become a topic of much interest and controversy among the Warner Brothers top brass. Babyface has its origins in the 1932 Jean Harlow film, Red-Headed Woman. That movie, the story of a female who decides to have affairs with multiple men in order to advance her social position in life, was a huge hit, and with its frank themes of explicit sexuality, became a major talking point in the industry. Darryl Zanuck, then head of production of Warner Brothers, developed the story of a social climber who uses sex to get to the top. Barbara Stanwyck was the studio's biggest female draw, so it only made natural sense that she should star in it. But when Babyface was finally sent out for release, the results went down a lot differently than what might initially have been assumed. During a very limited release, Babyface instantly became the ire of censorship boards everywhere. In Ohio, for example, the movie was rejected because it was deemed unpresentable. Ah yes, he hated the movie so much, he decided to see it twice. Come on, man. You're not fooling anyone. But the turning point was when the film was rejected by the New York State censorship boards. This caused the movie to be sent right back to the production code, where in order to make the film's salacious subject matter all the less glaringly obvious, cuts had to be made. Sex elements were heavily downplayed, scenes were either altered, or they were cut from the final product altogether. For example, this bit of dialogue exchange between Lily and the cobbler Craig, as rewritten by Joseph Breen, went from this,
"But you must use men, not let them use you. You must be a master, not a slave,"
to this.
"But there is a right and a wrong way. Remember, the price of the wrong way is too great."
Aside from the probably intentional removal of the philosopher Nietzsche, who was critical of contemporary Christianity, essentially the character was changed to be more of Lily's consciousness, her guiding soul, rather than telling her to essentially take advantage of her looks. This was part of Breen's morally compensating values, that characters who do something bad must be completely utterly punished for their crimes. In Babyface, we have a very primitive but potent early example of this. In the original more ambiguous ending, and request to destroy every man's life, Lily Powers winds up in what we can only assume is a much better happy place by the end with George Brent. They couldn't let that fly in 1933, so instead the dialogue was rewritten to imply that George Brent's Cortland wasn't going to make it, and a scene was added to show that Lily Powers and her husband gave the money back to the bank. Thankfully, the original cut was restored, so we can watch it in its more uncensored version and see, oh yeah, they actually went to town with this one. In general, I find the last scene, either the uncensored or censored version, to be a bit hokey and unimpressive. But one thing I will give the original, over the obviously later worse cut, is that it makes way more logical sense. Despite all that attempted reforming in France, it's clear Lily hasn't changed one bit. The original ending goes more in the direction of Red-Headed Woman, where a main character actually gets away with her actions. The Breen-approved ending reduces the film to a far more problematic man stops the woman sort of trope, which is something that the censorship would later go on to revel in. It just rings as super false to me. Besides, I think Lily and Chico should have gotten together. I'd say Stanwyck had considerably better chemistry with Teresa Harris than she did with George Brent. And to make it more blatant, the last shot of the censored version is a return sequence of the train from earlier. Yeah, Lily's life was this close to being the definition of a train wreck. Babyface is a good reminder in the case of getting a top, sometimes people don't have a choice, because society's placed them in a particular role or category. While its intentions weren't always clear of heart, it's clear this idea has never changed, and it probably never will. King Kong. You know the name King Kong. What more is there to be said about King Kong that hasn't already been said, from its remakes to its sequels and its most recent installments? The story of a struggling director who takes a crew to find the eighth wonder of the world has been documented to death. But here's an interesting question. Where is King Kong placed in the pantheon of pre-code cinema? It was released in 1933, which puts it squarely in the middle of that particular time period of American films that had much more lax censorship restrictions. Surely there must be material that would be considered rough and coarse, even for 1933. Beyond the incredible groundbreaking special effects from stop-motion animation pioneer Willis O'Brien, and the classic jungle element, King Kong is a very pre-code film. This is a movie that covers themes ranging from the Great Depression to direct elements of slavery. Yeah, well about that. Let's get it out of the way. The natives are basically the elephant in the room in regards to people's modern enjoyment of this film. But the reason they're bad is not just because they're stereotypically questionably themed African savages. It's also because they play in the movie's time period era of sexism. Their sole purpose in the story is essentially to sacrifice women off to Kong. That's not good, yes, and it never should have been considered an acceptable presentation of these type of characters. But it should be noted that this fits in the larger mold of being a classic adventure film, in which the archetypes were abundant. You can't do anything to change it, but it shouldn't be ignored either. Also, I should mention there's a Chinese cook character who, while presented in a friendly fashion, talks in a stereotypical accent, is played for laughs, and is given the name of Charlie. This thornier subject matter aspect aside, it is interesting to look at King Kong from a pre-code perspective. While it's a thrilling adventure film on the one hand, it is also swarming with elements of sadness that reflect the time period it was made in. While these ideas are more abundantly apparent in the 2005 Peter Jackson remake, as is everything, the original is not without it either. When we first meet Anne, for example, she is shown stealing an apple, a clear sign that she is barely even living a paycheck-by-paycheck lifestyle. She accepts Carl Denham's film offer, not just because she knows that she's the perfect pretty face he's looking for, but also because she rightfully assumes she will benefit financially from it. Her character ultimately devolves into that of a vapid scream queen, as per the logic of traditional old-school story conventions, that the film's hero Jack needs to rescue by the end. She does, however, start out with some level of surprise and urgency, with a bit of a slide on in the dialogue, to her role as the only actual female in a crew composed nearly entirely of men. Co-screenwriter Ruth Rose, wife of director Ernest B. Schoedsack, and an explorer in her own right, probably added to this element, bringing a bit of a female wit to this ultimately very male-gazy story.
Just being around's trouble.
Oh, dear, and I thought everything was going so nicely.
Although I will say I find it far-fetched. For a woman that's supposedly that poor, how could she actually afford perfect makeup? Then again, it is a big movie, so you need to have some gorgeous looks. Carl Denham himself is a very pre-1934 character as well. He is presented as an opportunist, a man who will do anything to get a big hit, literally. He's after King Kong not just because he wants to be the first non-Skull Island native who discovers the beast, but also because he believes it'll benefit his career. If he has to injure or kill some people in the process, so be it. Being a filmmaker, Denham is a not-so-secret personal commentary on the struggles of co-director Marion C. Cooper.
I go out and sweat blood to make a swell picture, and then the critics and the exhibitors all say, if this picture had love interest, it would gross twice as much.
You know what I found most remarkable about Denham as a character? He's not punished. Think about it for a second. He gets multiple people killed, disrupts and destroys the lives of natives, and New York City is left in complete shambles because of his actions. Yet there he is at the end of the film, completely fine. If anything, his fate is worse than death. He has to face the repercussions of what his actions wrought. The sequel, Son of Kong, expands upon this idea, turning into a story of redemption, but the original closes pretty startlingly as he stares at the corpse of his discovery, saying the immortal last line,
Oh, no. It wasn't the airplanes. It was beauty killed the beast.
And about that discovery too. King Kong looks like this and he acts like that. He has a massive body count, yet somehow we're supposed to find him sympathetic, because it's clear he's just an expressive animal, protective of his territory, and being exploited in the process. When he falls to his death iconically at the end of the film, it is not presented as the demise of a villain, but rather the end of a misunderstood creature. Even though his relationship with Anne has a number of outdated gender political problems around it, he is obsessed with her to the point where he's willing to protect her at all costs. After 1934, a character like that would have been designed to garner little to no sympathy from the audience. Just for comparison's sake, let's look at a film from the creators of King Kong, Mighty Joe Young. In that film, Joe acts like a relatively normal gorilla, just with a more sensitive side. But when Joe goes on a rampage, nobody actually gets seriously hurt. At best, a bunch of lions are tossed around, somehow miraculously surviving in the process. Because, you know, Hays Code movie logic. King Kong, however, has no such restrictions. He is free to his heart's content to go after others. The violence in King Kong in general is actually quite surprisingly extreme for the time. Carl Denham's crew is helplessly viciously attacked, and nearly entirely killed off one by one, by the sinister beast lurking on Skull Island, while the classic fight between King Kong and the T-Rex, in addition to being a seminal stop-motion piece of animation, is presented as incredibly gruesome, with Kong snapping the T-Rex jaws backwards quite hard, and real blood coming out of it. Part of King Kong's long-term appeal as a story that filmmakers keep returning to is that while it presents itself as a grand epic of massive proportions, It is at its heart a horror movie, full of components that would make people squirm if they thought about it too hard. Take the supposedly long-lost spider pit sequence. This remains one of the greatest pieces of non-media lost media ever. It has long been a debate in film history if this scene was actually shot, and if it did, there are conflicting reports as to why it was cut, ranging from it slowed down the pace of the film to an original 1933 test screening that resulted in audiences at the time being shocked and horrified by the sequence so much that they asked for it to be removed. Whether the sequence was made or not, and I'm of the opinion that it probably wasn't, we do have evidence from the models to the initial screenplay to the concept art that if it was not at least filmed, it was written. So why are people obsessed with the scene's existence in a way they aren't with most old school movie deleted material? Well, aside from the fact comes from a very famous movie, it fits right in with Kong's aesthetic. Cooper and Schoedsack were both directors who were clearly willing to push the limits of implied ghastly imagery. The 1932 adaptation of The Most Dangerous Game, for example, features scenes of actual human heads, and supposedly based off also lost deleted material, they wanted to go even further. It is thus not unbelievable that a movie like King Kong would have at least originally featured a sequence of such walled-in terror and panic. If it exists or not, well, I can't give you a definite answer, but just the thought that it was even considered is enough to make one curious. Given all that I've mentioned, it might not come as a surprise that when King Kong was re-released in 1938, the more violent and risque stuff had to be excised to meet censorship requirements of the day. This includes the scene where Kong undresses Fay Ray, the natives being crushed by Kong in brutal close-ups, and a sequence where Kong climbing an apartment building casually drops a terrified woman to her death just because he mistook her for Anne. Thankfully, none of this footage was actually destroyed, so when the movie got re-released again in the early 70s, it was added back in, hence why we can see it now. But even considering that, just from a thematic point of view, King Kong still stands in opposition to so much of what the Hays Code would later go on to loathe. Joseph Breen and a team of censorship men could remove more extreme images, they could blacken the blood, but what they couldn't remove was Kong's clear lust for Anne and his savage behavior. Without it, there wouldn't have been a movie to begin with. King Kong holds up well in many regards. It's a grand adventure epic, a sort of forerunner of the future blockbusters, but it stands out from its time period as well. If you can get past the elements that don't quite work, I think you might be pleasantly surprised, as you might be with all of these films, that there was a time in the early days when Hollywood was really willing to push buttons. The thematic material was laid on thick, but boy did I enjoy the experience.